Very happy to welcome as our second speaker, Lila Rose. Lila Rose was called Messenger in Chief of the Pro-Life Movement by Vice News and the face of the Millennial Anti-Abortion Movement by The Atlantic. Lila is a writer, speaker, and activist who founded and serves as president of Live Action, a human rights organization with the largest online impact among pro-life and pro-abortion groups, reaching 40 million people per month. Wow. And with over 2.5 billion lifetime video views. Lila has devoted her life to ending abortion and making America a more welcoming place for families. She's the author of Fighting for Life, Becoming a Force for Change in a Wounded World, and hosts Lila Rose podcast. Lila, you want to come on camera? Thank you very much for being here. It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you, Walter. It's an honor, truly a privilege to join all of you and be on this special virtual event with you for Catholic homeschool families. I am a child of homeschooling myself, as well as my 7 siblings. My husband is also a child of homeschooling until the 8th grade. And so homeschooling is very near and dear to my heart. And I believe that it is homeschool families that are not only helping save the culture today, but they are the future of our culture. And that's why I was thrilled when you invited me to join you on this special conference, a special webcast. I want to share with all of you some of my thoughts on why my homeschool education was so incredibly beneficial to me. 3 things that I thought my parents did so beautifully that I would encourage any homeschool family to consider in adopting practices for their own family. And also, very importantly, 3 key things that we can do as families to foster a pro-life culture in our own family and raise up our family to make a difference in this culture on behalf of life. Many of you may be familiar with Live Action, but we are the digital leader for education in the pro-life movement globally. And we exist because children are precious, life is worth fighting for, and because abortion is the biggest human rights abuse that we face as a nation and globally. The killing of unborn children in our country is the #1 cause of death for any human being. There are 1 million abortions every single year, and our legal system does not protect these children. In addition, our culture is very wounded, and people are very confused about the value of life and the dignity of life. So I am going to guess that one of the reasons many of you started to homeschool and chose to homeschool is because you not only care passionately about the education of your children, but you are also passionate about a mission to help your children get to heaven. Yes, your family get to heaven, but a mission to raise up young people who themselves can be disciples of Christ in the world today and can also be on a mission to help other souls get to heaven. You're not just doing an educational project. This is a mission field that you are in, and your family is a core foundation for that mission field in raising a family of saints. And so when I think about my childhood and I think about the things that my parents have done, there's so much opportunity that I've been given to learn from their example. Not only was I the recipient as a child, but I get to look back and learn from their example as now an adult. I have 3 children of my own. I have a 1-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 5-year-old. So we're doing whatever kind of homeschool you can do for ages that young. I'm very blessed to be married to my husband, Joseph. And we talk often about how we want to educate our kids and what our parents did that was incredibly beneficial to us. So I wanted to share 3 things that I thought were beautiful that my parents did as a homeschool family. Quick background for those listening. A homeschool family of 8 kids. San Jose, California is where I'm from. And my parents were really first-generation homeschoolers. So I'm sure some of you listening are first-generation homeschoolers in that you don't really know many people who were homeschooled, you weren't homeschooled growing up, and you're really pioneering a path. Or maybe you're listening to this and you were like, oh, I get the homeschool thing, I was homeschooled, or people close to me were homeschooled, or close friends have been homeschooling for years and I've observed how they've done it. So whether you're new to this or you feel like an old hand at this, I think there are certainly some overwhelming moments that any homeschool parent is going to feel. And I know my parents went into homeschooling because this was a mission for them. They wanted their children to have the best education, and they wanted their children to have the opportunity to learn and to grow in an environment that was fostering of them. And at the time of public school in the 1990s, when my parents were starting their homeschool journey, that was when there's a big political push to pull prayer out of the public school. Some of you might remember this, say, prayer doesn't belong in public school. In addition to that, there were other potential forces, especially in California, that were infiltrating public schools. You don't see anything near to what we see today with the LGBTQ agenda, the pro-abortion agenda very explicitly in our public schools in most states across the country. But my parents were definitely knowledgeable about the current issues with the public school system at the time. So this inspired them, and it was also a mission. I want to build this beautiful family. I want to help, all go to heaven together and build a family of saints. A quick note, I was not homeschooled as a Catholic. I actually would become Catholic in college, and my parents became Catholic and most of my siblings. But I will say many of the elements of our upbringing were very Catholic. We were the biggest family in our Protestant church by probably 4 kids. My parents were against contraception right there. That's a very, Catholic, usually Catholic thing. People would joke when they met our family when we were younger, "Oh, are you guys Mormon?" And my parents would say no, and then they'd say, "Are you guys Catholic?" And they'd say no, and then, here we are, we're evangelical Christians, or we were at the time. But these are the 3 things that my parents did that I thought were so wonderful. Number 1, they really focused on reading and the right books as a core part of our education. There's all kinds of curriculum that you could use, but my parents really were focused on what are the great books, what are the classics, what are the key foundational really documents of Western civilization, you could say. And they gave us the intellectual and spiritual giants of the past several thousand years, really, particularly the past 2,000 years, of Christendom, post-Christ. And that was so powerful for us because it shaped our mind with philosophy, theology, just by reading. And it also shaped our mind with the great stories of heroes, with the great poetry. I think about Dante. They gave us these beautiful, immediate access to the greatest thinkers and artists of the past 2,000 years. And no textbook can do that like the original source material, right? And I know many homeschool families are probably already doing this, which I applaud, but I want to encourage you to make these books a core part of any system that you're using to educate your children. And this would include, of course, you have the last century of amazing writers. You have you have Tolkien, you have G.K. Chesterton, you have, C.S. Lewis, not a Catholic, but very Catholic in his writing. You have those phenomenal writers of the last century. And then you go back in time, and you have, you have fiction, you have Jane Austen, you have Charles Dickens, you have Fyodor Dostoevsky, you have the great, Russian writers, you have really, again, classics, and you can go further back in time and you start accessing the church fathers and doctors and their incredible work. And I'll say that it was really because of what we read as homeschooled kids, especially the church fathers and doctors. And, folks like even Peter Kreeft. I was reading Christianity for Modern Pagans in high school by Peter Kreeft. I don't know if you're familiar, but it's a book. Peter Kreeft is a great Catholic writer, and I would say really theologian in many ways. And Christianity for Modern Pagans is really a commentary by Peter Kreeft on Blaise Pascal, the thoughts, Le Pensée, the thoughts of Blaise Pascal. And it was so beautiful. It was so, stirring, the faith in me. And it wasn't explicitly Catholic, overtly Catholic. It wasn't about, Catholic theological differences between Catholicism and Protestants, but it laid the foundation for philosophically and theologically for me and for my siblings, many of whom, again, would later become Catholic. So we like to joke in our family that we were a Protestant family, but we were being catechized by our Protestant parents, in some ways better than, most parishes may catechize. And it was that catechesis that was the foundation for our entry into the Catholic Church, at different times, but in a close period of time when I was in college and other family members were coming in. And my parents have, entered the Catholic Church. My mother actually was baptized Catholic, not practicing as a child. Her family didn't practice, and then would come back to the Catholic Church very joyfully when my dad entered the church shortly after I came in. So, but the books, the right thinkers, because it's really engaging with the greatest minds, the greatest spirits. And what is that? That's so Catholic, right? The communion of the saints. It transcends time. This is our heavenly communion of the saints. We need the saints. We need the saints for their encouragement, their example, for their teaching, We need them for their moral clarity. And so giving our children direct access to the greatest minds and spirits of the last 2,000 years, and certainly of the church, I think you can't go wrong with it. You cannot go wrong with it. And if you can do that and give them that, I think you've done more than half the project of a foundation, of an education that's excellent, that has a foundation in the truth, that roots them in the truth, so that when they go off into the world, as they get older, they're able to test what is true and not true. They're able to reason. They're able to have a worldview that's fully formed and in line with the truth. And they're set up for success, ultimately. So they required the right books, number one. And that gave me the vision for what is good, true, and beautiful. Number two, what my parents did, which I'm so appreciative for as homeschool family, they gave us an environment. They fostered an environment of freedom and creativity. I'm going to guess that one of the reasons that many of you have chosen to homeschool, in addition to wanting to do better coursework, is you wanted more flexibility as a family. You wanted more family time as a family. You didn't want your kids going off to an institution for 6, 7, 8 hours a day. You wanted to be that institution where they spent most of their time. Maybe you're in a co-op, you're doing part-time school, but you wanted more time. Well, what I loved about my parents did is they celebrated entrepreneurial projects. They celebrated curiosity. They celebrated, maybe walking to the beat of a different drum and trying new things. There wasn't a posture of fear when it came to creativity, imagination, new opportunities, new ideas. There was a spirit of openness and even excitement. Both my parents are very open people. My dad, intellectually, he's very curious. He's really into books, into writing, reading. He was the one who really celebrated that great coursework of the great classics that we read. My mother is very open and curious, especially in terms of community, entrepreneurial type projects. She loves to start new things, go places. She's very social. That combination and what that gave us kids was really beautiful, because we saw everybody as a friend. There was not those people out there and we're out here, the homeschoolers. It was more like everyone's great. Everyone's a friend. We can, talk to anyone. Gave us that confidence. What did that look like concretely? If a child had an interest, for example, my brothers were really into computers. I was raised in Silicon Valley in the 90s, right? So my brothers were all into computers. My dad was getting them little computer sets to make base boards and put the electrical wiring in, and that was their big project. They loved to do that together. And my dad just gave my brothers the opportunity, a few of them who loved it, the opportunity to do that. What did that look like for me personally? Well, for me, I loved to read. I was obsessed with reading. My parents let that be a significant part of my coursework, just to read. Now, I had to do other things too, but they let me just read. And sometimes it was too much. They would put the book on top of the refrigerator if I was reading when I was not doing something I was supposed to be doing something else. But they encouraged me to pursue what I loved. I also really came and discovered to love the pro-life cause. I found out about abortion as an 8 or 9-year-old child. I was very deeply convicted. I wanted to do something to fight abortion. My parents were not hiding the truth from me. They let me ask questions. They let me learn and read about the issue that I became very passionate about. And then when I wanted to get involved in the pro-life movement, they let me volunteer at the Pregnancy Resource Center. They let me go and, to the Pregnancy Resource Center events. They let me have friends over to our family home on a weekly basis to start live action. They were never pushing these activities. They didn't have an agenda like, I wish my daughter was an activist, or I wish my son was a computer scientist. They were careful, I noticed, to not have agendas for their particular desires for us. But they were also careful to notice what we ourselves loved, what we ourselves were drawn to, and then give us the opportunity to continue to pursue that thing with their support. And one last thing I'll say on this front is that they gave us a lot of really a menu of a lot of activities to try. And some of them were mandatory. So piano lessons, we had to start piano lessons at age, I think, 6. And we did them faithfully, I think, until age 16. I was almost 10 years of piano lessons. I didn't love piano. There were many times where I said, I don't want to do this. I don't want to keep doing this. But it taught me an appreciation for theory, for music. That was a foundation for really my understanding of the arts in many ways. There's even a mathematical foundation there with music, that connection there. But I had other siblings who, my sister Nina is now a singer. She went to music school at UCLA. And that same foundation that I had, she went and ran with it. But the reason she was able to discover her love of voice and piano and music and everything else was because they gave her a starting point. And so I think, homeschool families that give their children starting points, whether it's through field trips or volunteer activities, whether it's through allowing them to try a musical instrument or getting involved in sports, those things give the child the opportunity to discover, is this something that I love doing? Is this something that maybe I'm born to do, as you might say? And that doesn't mean that you should let the children decide everything for themselves. Obviously, you all know that, but it does mean that, well, you challenge the child and keep them on a routine for certain things that are essential. You especially can foster those things that the child is already maybe attuned for or even made for. And that's a beautiful gift of homeschooling, is that ability to tailor make the education in no small way for each student. And then the last thing that I will say about what my parents gave me that I'm so grateful for is that they gave me homeschool debate. I had to do a shout out for homeschool debate. I kind of am curious to look at the chat if anyone is already doing homeschool debate for their older children, but I started homeschool debate, speech and debate at age 11. I kind of snuck in, even though I was too young technically for the league. And I just loved it. And I did it for 4+ years. I graduated high school a little early, but I did it throughout my entire high school. I did the speech, I did the drama, I did the extemporaneous speaking, I did the duo improvisations, I did the team policy debate. So we'd have a resolution every year, and we'd debate tax policy and agriculture policy and energy policy. And we learned so many invaluable lessons in homeschool debate. Now, some kids are more introverted or they're more shy, and they might be like, oh, I don't want to do debate. Well, sometimes the shyest kids, once they got involved, at first they're like, I don't want to do it, I don't want to do it. They would just come alive. And it would build such tremendous confidence, as well as critical thinking skills, research skills, the ability to discern, false ideas online and how they're proliferated versus what is true, and critically review, media sources and, first primary sources, the ability to construct an argument, to become well-versed in logic and rhetoric. These were all blessings of homeschool debate. The ability to work on a team and to have a team spirit with your club and with your partner and your group. The ability to explore and try new things, to build confidence in public speaking, of course, is one core aspect of it. So I just had to give a shout out. And there's the STOA League, there's NCFCA, and I am so grateful for my homeschool debate experience. I believe that experience as part of being homeschooled set me up professionally for my work at Live Action, and really all the work I do in media and creative work and politics. That work as a homeschool debate student was really foundational, and it was the best media training. It was the best writing, writers boot camp. It was the best, debate boot camp. It was the best presentation skills boot camp, better than any Toastmasters could ever dream to do. It really was phenomenal. So it took a lot of sacrifice. My parents were on the road. You have to travel to these tournaments, and there's some cost involved too. So my parents, I know at one point, I hope they don't mind me sharing this, but we had a modest home growing up. They ended up being able to get another home that was a little bigger once they had more children, but they had to take out a loan against their own home to be able to afford some of these extracurriculars. But now looking back, they've, been able to grow in a way financially that they're, doing well, but they made a lot of financial sacrifices and even financial risks, quite frankly, in order to be able to do these extra things that were so instrumental for me personally, as well as I believe many of my other siblings. So homeschool debate rocks. They fostered an environment of freedom and curiosity and creativity. They required the right books. Bonus, I know I already gave the 3 things, I just gotta say one more thing. They told me that they loved me. They were very affectionate. And I think building a culture of affection, and I remember in our family story, there were some years where we were not as affectionate overtly. And then I remember my parents going on their own journey of even counseling, spiritual guiding, their own healing, and some of their own issues from their childhoods and their upbringings. And I remember this sort of shift in our family culture. I think I was probably 10 or 11, maybe 12, when I could see my parents, not that they weren't loving before, but they became more intentional about expressing love verbally, physically, in the way they interacted with us kids. And I do think that was a tremendous blessing to us kids. We knew we were loved. They told us we were loved. And, no parent is perfect. I'm a parent now. I already am trembling in my boots, like, I'm messing it up already. They're 1, 3, and 5, and I'm already making mistakes. No parent is perfect. But when you tell your child you love them, you hug them, you look them in the eyes, you talk to them, you listen to them, they will know your love. And they will remember that even when there's disagreements later or clashes or whatever else there might be. So they told me they love me. All right, last 3 things I want to share with you. How to create world changers and build that pro-life culture in the family home. And I have 3 key things for you here that I wanted to share. Number 1, don't back away from hard topics. And I think many of you, I'm sure, are already strong on this. You know how important it is to prepare children for the world. And also because children, they are smarter than we think. They know a lot more than we think, but they're also very innocent. So we need to protect their innocence. So the way my parents did this is they didn't push these issues on us kids growing up. It's not like they told me at age 8 or some arbitrary age, here's abortion, this is that. I had the opportunity to discover it through really literature, through reading, which is, I think, a great way to access it because you are learning about, the world. And certainly when you're reading the classics, you learn about good and evil. You read Shakespeare and there's like horrible people, represented doing horrible things, committing horrible acts. And you kind of start to have a lens for understanding that there's good and evil. You read the Bible, you read the Old Testament. Oh my goodness, so many horrible, horrible stories, right? So you're going to learn about good and evil as a child, just quite naturally as you start to learn and read and engage with, the classics, things like that. But when these topics came up, my parents didn't back away from them. They would answer them, yes, in an age-appropriate way, but they wouldn't sidestep tough issues. And when I learned about abortion and I was starting to read this particular book called A Handbook on Abortion, it's kind of this older 1980s kind of activist manual book at the time, my parents didn't say I couldn't read it. My parents didn't say, oh, that's, let's talk about this later when you're a little older. They answered me soberly, yes, abortion is killing a baby and it's wrong. It's happening. And yeah, we have to pray for the babies. They didn't water it down. And I'm so grateful for that because if they had kind of shrugged it off to me more as a 9-year-old child and like, okay, well, we'll just pray. And, that's, don't worry about it. Like, some bad things happen in the world. That's life. I don't know that the seed would have been planted as deeply in me that this is not just some bad thing happening, but this is the worst thing that has happened in American history, and I had to do something about it, and I would do something about it. But again, they told me the truth, and they let me learn the truth as well. So don't back away from hard topics. I think one little other note I'll make here is when it comes to issues of sexuality, I think it's important that when those are discussed, they're not discussed because something evil comes up, right? We're living in such craziness, pornography, LGBTQ ideology, all of the lies of the culture, right? But I think already fostering a beautiful and affectionate marriage, if you're blessed to be married, talking openly about how much you love each other, what marriage is for. And what I'm getting at here is talking about the positive, right? What is sex designed for? Marriage. What does sex do? Bring life into the world. That's designed, and it's beautiful. It's good. It's not embarrassing. It's not something that we can never talk about. And, kids will naturally maybe have questions, but answering them matter-of-factly and pointing to the end purpose, which is that this is all good things. These are all beautiful things. And maybe one day if the child is called to marriage, you'll find a spouse, you'll find a wife or a husband, and maybe the Lord will give you children. And what a blessing it is. How awesome that will be if that's God's call, or maybe you won't be called to that. And, maybe your motherhood or your fatherhood will be more spiritual. But having those conversations, even at a very young age, if they come up at all with the child, I think is very good. So do not back away from hard topics. Number 2, as a child gets older, get them involved in real world advocacy. I think it's very powerful when a family, especially if the kids are in their early teen years, go and pray at the abortion clinic. I have taken my children to pray at an abortion clinic, so I don't think it's inappropriate to do that. Now, I understand some kids have different sensitivities, so I'm not saying, oh, you have to go take your 5-year-old to an abortion clinic. You have to do what you feel is best for that child and your family. But I think it's very powerful to pray at an abortion clinic, especially during 40 Days for Life campaigns. I also think it's very powerful to volunteer at the local pregnancy center. It's a very positive spin on it, right? We're going to help the babies. We're going to, maybe it's go in the pregnancy center's store or their shop or their, warehouse or the room that holds the baby clothes, and you can help organize, or you can help stuff envelopes. I stuffed envelopes when I was a little girl with my grandmother at the pregnancy center. Doing little things like that, I think, can be very formative for your child to say, we're not only engaging ideas intellectually about helping people, but we are going out as a family and helping people. And you might find other ways to do this. Maybe you're volunteering at the homeless shelter. Maybe there's other church parish activities you can get involved with, but taking your children with you into the mission field, even when they are young, in a safe way, in a way where you have a security around them and you're talking through it with them. You're explaining what you're doing as you do it. I think that's very important. That can be very powerful and world shaping for your children. My kids and I were going to the dollar store recently, just a few days ago, because when they do certain things around the house, or if they're, we have this little system of if they, my oldest son helps his brother, et cetera, then they get points to go to the dollar store to pick a toy. But we were walking in and there was a homeless gentleman out front, and we greeted him. Again, it's a safety thing. You don't know how much to engage, or you don't want to necessarily who this person is, because I've got my baby with me, my 3-year-old, my 5-year-old. But afterwards, I was talking with my kids and I was saying, we were talking about it. And I said, what do you mean he has no home? What do you mean he has no place to go? And I said, well, some people don't have a home, but it's our responsibility to pray for them and find ways that we can help people who don't have homes. So one thing that our family does is we donate to St. Vincent de Paul Ministries to give places, food and shelter to people that don't have homes. So immediately connecting the real world event that we're not shielding them from, but we're also not pushing it, their face into it, connecting it back to how we deal with this reality as a family, and why this is an opportunity for love ultimately. And I think that's the key, is that any bad thing in the world is an opportunity for love for God's people. All right, the last thing is, and one last thing I'll say on that, activism is a muscle. Activism and community engagement is a muscle. So if you try it the first time, if you've never prayed outside the abortion clinic, you've never done like a volunteer ministry out in the field with your kids, it's going to maybe feel awkward when the first time you do it, or might feel a little overwhelming. But it's a muscle, and the more you do it, the more comfortable you get. And also a caveat, if you have very little kids and a bunch of them, this is not required. It's not like, oh, I've got to take my 1-year-old, my 2-year-old, and my 4-year-old to the soup kitchen. I mean, the soup kitchen might not want you there, right? So it's going to depend on context, of course, and the age of the kids. But largely speaking, having that culture is good. My parents would take us to wrap presents for children who were, underhomed, I think they called them. They would be in and out of care homes, but to wrap presents for foster children, and to go maybe buy the present. I think we'd go buy the present, and then we'd take it to this kind of warehouse where other families were, and we'd wrap the presents together. We also went and did serving the homeless meals, as us kids got older. So we did those volunteer activities. In high school, I went on a missions trip, multiple missions trips, one to Mexico, one to Morocco. We did these other, even more aggressive projects to go out and serve people who are less fortunate than we were. Last thing I would recommend to raise world changers and to build the culture of life in your family is root them in Scripture and the sacraments. And I'm sure many of you are already doing this, which is beautiful. Make Scripture a part of your daily life. Obviously the readings for the day, the church has us covered. They give it to us. My parents would actually have Bible verses on the wall. Do all things with joy, give thanks in all things, verses, Psalms, a lot of stuff from the New Testament. And that would help foster a memory of what the Lord actually has to say about our posture and about how we should see the world. Renew your mind. The scriptures about the importance of the mind and developing a mind of Christ ultimately. All of these things were part of growing up. And then sacraments, we didn't have, many of the sacraments, we were Protestant, but you have the sacraments. And just taking your children to Mass, of course on Sunday, but maybe one other day a week. Your homeschool family, so you have the control over your schedule. Take your kids to Mass, maybe at least one other day a week. Take your kids to sit in front of the Blessed Sacrament in adoration, or just to sit there and to pray. They can maybe even bring a book to read, or they get to color. Sometimes I go with my kids and they can just color. I think those are opportunities for them to begin to develop an ear for God and an ear for the voice of God. And giving them that opportunity, I think, is essential. If you're going to build a world changer, they need to have a personal connectivity to God. And you are already giving it to them through your love. You're giving it to them through, your family being practicing Catholics. But actually taking the time to go and sit still with God, I think is so beautiful. And to actually listen to God's words through Holy Scripture is so important. So those would be 2 last things I would say. If you're going to raise world changers, to have them listen to God, sit before the Blessed Sacrament to listen for God. Make sure they know you can listen to God anytime. It doesn't have to be in front of the Blessed Sacrament, but this is a special place. And then to also make Holy Scripture a part of your daily routine as a family. Before I close here for questions, I have one final message to give. And this is a message for any students who might be listening. There are, I think some young people listening here as well as parents. And St. Paul told the Greeks, what you worship in ignorance, I now proclaim to you in truth. We were made, what you worshiped in ignorance, I now proclaim to you in truth. We were made to know the truth and to speak the truth. Words are incredibly powerful. Jesus Christ is the Word. God spoke and the world came into existence. And so when we are given the truth, it is a secret weapon, and a not so secret weapon that can overcome the greatest attacks of the enemy, that can overcome doubt and fear, that can overcome death itself through the power of God. And we were made to speak the truth boldly and with love. And so for any young people listening, I want to encourage you that you are not too young. You are not too young to speak the truth. You are not too young to know the truth. You are not too young to help saints, to help souls and to become saints. You are not too young. You are never too young. And to really delight in the love that God has for you, the plan that he has for you, open yourself to it. Say, God, what do you want me to do with my life? And to just have confidence in the truth, because our culture is very confused. People might have attacks against you, or they might look, you might feel or look different than others because of how you are, what you believe. And so that might feel like, okay, well, how do I operate? Have confidence. You know what is true. The truth that you share, that you carry in your heart, is a gift to be shared. And God loves you and will give you all the grace to do it. Thank you so much, Walter, and everyone for listening to me and being here. And I think we'll have a little bit of time for a Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Round of applause. Looks like you're getting a lot of love, little hearts, claps, etc. coming in.
Thank you.
So as promised, Lila, we had our Students for Life, the Homeschool Connection Students for Life, the only online sanctioned Students for Life, to my knowledge anyway, organization that's out there. They were invited to ask questions of Lila, and so they're first up. So I got a couple of questions from them, then I'll turn to the questions that have come in since.
Wonderful.
So the first question they asked is, how do you recommend responding to those who argue that the unborn are not persons because they do not have desires/interests? Which responses do you find are most effective?
Of course. So the unborn are not persons because they don't have desires/interests. I mean, it sounds like a little bit the argument saying, well, the unborn aren't persons yet because they don't have consciousness yet. listen, you look at what is, you have to ask the question, what is a human? What is a human? A human is when does human life begin? A human is by the law of biogenesis, is the offspring of two other humans, a male human and another female human. And a new human life has come into existence, scientifically speaking, at the moment of fertilization, when there's sperm egg fusion and you have a unique single cell embryo that comes into existence with its own distinct genetic code. And that single cell embryo is a whole body, tiny body, of a whole human that just needs time and nourishment to grow. And so we know definitively human life begins at fertilization. And the pro-life case is that, well, if you're a human, you have human rights. There aren't some humans that aren't persons and other humans that are, and only the humans that are persons get human rights and the others don't. When we've made that argument historically, like about slavery as an example, black people aren't fully persons. They might be human, they're not fully persons. That's when the greatest atrocities are committed. Or the last century, Nazi Germany. Well, the Jews aren't full persons. They're subhuman. And so therefore we can commit atrocities against them. That's always the path to atrocities and human rights abuses. And the other reason why, posing this special burden on the human and say, well, if the human isn't conscious yet, if the human doesn't kind of walk and talk yet, we shouldn't protect their life. We can kill them via an abortion. It's profoundly unfair because that's an arbitrary, unreasonable standard to put on the human. If you said, well, humanity is defined by our personhood is defined by our interests or our, I'm forgetting the other word that was used, but our interests or desires. Well, you could say, well, then a newborn is less of a human than an older person who has developed their interests and desires as they've matured, right? You're basically basing the value of the person on how developed they are. and how much they've developed their maybe intellect and their will. But we don't say, oh, an adult is more valuable than a child, or a 5-year-old is more valuable than a 1-year-old. We say they're equal in value because they're human. And that's why the child in the womb is equal in value to all of us and just as human, even though they're dependent on their mothers, of course, and less developed.
Fantastic. Thank you. And so another question, two questions actually. I think they're kind of two sides of the same coin. So I'll ask both of them. Are there any moments you want to share or pieces of wisdom you'd like to impart on the HSE Students for Life group, and in broader terms, other groups that are out there for this upcoming year? What advice would you provide to inspire young adults that are interested in becoming part of a Students for Life group? That's question number one. Question two, what is your advice to be teens interested in the pro-life voice to be impactful in their immediate community?
Sure. Well, I'd say the advice is that without kind of knowing more details about the student group, that for the first part of the question, just kind of a general advice, and my sense of it, come Holy Spirit, would just be the word that comes to mind is output. You have the ability, obviously, to learn, to review apologetics, to make sure you're prepared to argue the pro-life case. And when I say argue, I don't mean so you can win a debate. I more mean so that you can help people understand why pro-life is the correct position. And when I think about the word output, I think, okay, are there activities that you are doing in your community that you can do more of in this coming year? The world is waiting, right? So you could make sure you're involved in that 40 Days for Life campaign. You don't even need to do it with 40 Days for Life. You can go to the abortion clinic on your own, and make sure you get an adult agrees, gives you permission. Your parents give you permission, but you can go and pray the rosary at the abortion clinic on your own. You can come to more pro-life events. There are pro-life events maybe in your city. There's certainly national events. Live Action has an event every year in California. We're going to be doing more events across the country. You could make a field trip to the March for Life, right? You could do something like that. You could even host something in your own community or for other people at your parish. Have a pro-life speaker come. You could host a workshop for how to develop be better equipped at apologetics. So I would just say output. Think about the things, and there's different recommendations that Live Action can make. Other students, Students for Life certainly can make, and take the checklist of all the things you could do and just start checking them off. And when you work through the list of the things you've done, do it again. Because listen, every single time you speak, every single time you get activated and you do something, you may help save a life. You may help change a mind. But you got to keep putting yourself out there. People, when they have a job, they show up to work every day. They put themselves out there. They do the job, right? You wake up every day. You got to eat. You got to sleep. You got to do your homeschool studies. You got to do everything. In a sense, this is a daily battle. And certainly there are weekly or bi-weekly activities that you could put on the calendar and say, this is what we're going to do, and then encourage other people to join you. And I think that my advice would probably be similar to the other students listening as well.
Great, thank you. So Miriam asked, back to our audience here. My 10-year-old just recently asked what abortion is, but it didn't feel like it was the right time to talk with him about it. And I want to make sure to talk about this topic in an age-appropriate way with him. Do you have any suggestions on maybe literature that he could turn to? I'm throwing this in, but what are your suggestions around talking to a 10-year-old?
Well, I think it will depend on the 10-year-old as it would depend on any child. But I think that age, you're a preteen, you're prepubescent, you're probably, going to be entering puberty soon. Most 10-year-olds are pretty smart. They're pretty, there's a lot of innocence there, but they're really learning about the world. They're eager to learn. So especially if your 10-year-old's asking you about this issue, I wouldn't water it down. Now, you don't have to go be super explicit and tell every gory detail and talk about it for hours upon hours, but you can be straightforward with them and say, yes, abortion is ending the life of a baby. It is happening in our country. You could even use Live Action resources to help share with your 10-year-old if they're interested. You could certainly show them Baby Olivia, the video that we have of fetal development from the moment of fertilization. We also have abortion procedure videos. I wouldn't necessarily, point the 10-year-old, go watch this abortion procedure video. These are, by the way, medical animations. They're not the gory content of actually the abortion procedure. They're animations with a former abortionist explaining it. I think that really, if you had to pick an age for that, I would say 12, maybe 13, as they get even a little bit older. But I don't think it would be bad necessarily to share that with a 10-year-old. I saw images of aborted babies at 9 years old for the first time, and I think that was very formative for me. So I think engage with your child. You could watch a pro-life debate with them. That's one idea. I do pro-life debates. Someone like Trent Horn is fantastic. You could watch Stephanie Gray. You could watch a pro-life debate to engage them in the arguments, but I wouldn't shy away from the topic.
Great. So another question came in. And this is an interesting one. I haven't heard this angle per se, but often pro-life teens accept LGBTQ lifestyles. Why do you think there's a disconnect there, and what would you suggest to help them understand?
Yeah, I think it's a very good flag to raise that is happening. I've seen that happen where, Gen Z and Gen Alpha are so inundated. They're told that sexuality is a spectrum. They're told that gender is fluid. They're told that you can pick a identity. These are like the 40 identities, like check it out. And, it's very alluring. It's very seductive because when you're a young person, you're trying to find your identity. And the LGBTQ ideology says, look at all these identities you can have. They're so interesting. You're special. No one should be down on you for your feelings or your thoughts. You should be accepted as you are. And there's a lot of strong aspects of that message that are actually the message of what God would say to us as his children, right? So they're using the language of acceptance and love, of identity, things that are very powerful ideas. And they're using that language. They're really hijacking that language from the church. And they're using it to make young people feel like they belong, and to make young people feel like they're understood, and to make young people feel like they're accepted. And so a difficult job today because they pernicious lie about identity and belonging. And the only way to do that immunization successfully, in my view, is for the child to feel so understood and loved, and to be given that foundation in their home and through their education, so that they know their true identity, so that they know the truth about sexuality and identity, and they themselves have a place to go with their own questions or feelings or desires. Because adolescence is a rough time for most people. It is. You're going through a lot of changes hormonally, of a lot of crazy ideas. You're figuring things out. I mean, anybody thinking about their time as a teenager or preteen will remember those days. And so the posture I think parents should have is one of great gentleness, great respect, great empathy for their kids, and a strong, arm to guide them, to, help them understand what is true. Lots of conversations. I think lots of patience, lots of openness. But I do think that posture will be more successful, standing in the truth. You're not going to go accept a lie or tell them that, these things are true. You're going to guide them and tell them the truth. But that, having that posture of openness, belonging, empathy, affection is going to go a long way in helping young people stand up against the lies of the enemy, because the enemy is just lying about this nonstop. And then one other thing is just porn, exposure to porn. And exposure to things like sexual abuse, it's at an all-time high. And so, this is just a quick thing. I am anti-sleepover. Not to say that, your kids will be abused at a sleepover necessarily, but I think, kids belong in their own home, in their own beds, with their parents, and, being protective in today's day and age. I also think, pornography is so prevalent, and that really messes up with people's minds sexually. Like, they get very confused because of pornography. So not letting your kids have devices, or if they have a device because they're a little bit older, installing things like Covenant Eyes, or ensuring that they have, blocks to any explicit materials. I think that's also another important tool for parents to employ.
Yeah, I think on phones in particular, parents can create, or there's things that you can do to lock down certain applications on the phone that make it a whole lot more manageable. You don't have to worry about it as much.
And just being careful with YouTube consumption, like even kids' cartoons. I mean, there's all this nonsense in our kids' cartoons. So being very careful about what they watch and what they're watching. And then I would say no social media. I mean, I haven't figured out what to do with my kids. My oldest is only 5, but I mean, 16 at the youngest would be my gut for giving kids access to social media. 16 at the youngest, because social media is really the devil. I mean, in so many ways, social media is the devil's playground. Now, God, you can sanctify it. God, you can do good things on social media, but it really is, there's so much evil on social media.
Yeah, I think that kind of that dopamine hit that kids love is what attracts them, right? And keeps
Yeah.
bringing them back and back and back, and it creates this kind of euphoric
Yep.
experience. But at the end of the day, it's they keep coming back to it. So it's they keep doing it, whatever it might be that gets the likes. It can
Yeah.
be kind of a problem. So
That
yeah,
too. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
So another question came in.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear three things that you would not repeat that was in your
Oh,
homeschool growing up. So you talked about the three
yeah.
things that you would encourage, but what are the three things that you'd say, no more, not
Yeah.
right, not for us, whatever.
That is a great question. And my parents are so humble and loving that, we've had conversations with them and my parents have even apologized to us kids for things that they believe they did wrong in childhood, as adults, adult children. And certainly I noticed too, growing up, when they felt they did something wrong, like my dad was overly angry, or he lost his temper, in any kind of significant way, he would apologize afterwards because he did struggle with anger issues growing up. Three things that I would say that I wouldn't want to repeat. I think that, and again, my parents did the best they could with the tools they had because, their family backgrounds had their issues. So they did a lot. But my mom would always say, my goal is to do better than my parents' generation. Like every
Yeah.
generation does better than last. That's what our project, we just want to set you up better than we were set up. And obviously pass on whatever was good. But I think my parents had a lot of, there were mental health issues in the family, where my dad struggled with depression. And I think it was largely undiagnosed growing up in the earlier years. And so there was a lot of additional stresses that if that had been properly diagnosed and dealt with, I think my parents would have had not a much easier go of it, but it would have been an easier go of it. There would have been more peace because there was a lot of tension because of the depression and the consequences of it. So that would be one thing, is just being more attuned to to kind of make it more, put a point on it, be more attuned to your own health as a parent. Your own health as a parent, mental, physically, and spiritually. You being healthy as a parent is a gift to your kids. And so do not sacrifice your health, because you're actually serving your kids by being healthy mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. You asked, these are tough. This is a good, tough question.
Yeah, it's a very tough question. Yeah. And by the way, it's worth pointing
yeah,
out that, I mean, I know that here at our house, right? I have
yeah.
red hair. What does red hair usually connotate? You can't really see it as well, but it connotates an attitude. Like you lose your temper quickly, and then it comes back down very quickly, right? It's it's something that I know that dads will, and I have had this, like your dad. I've had my own regrets, right, when I've
Mhm.
lost my temper. But at the end of the day, I think kids begin to understand. Hey, dad's human.
Of course.
He's
Yep.
still, I mean, he loves me. He's still, like you said earlier, the love,
Yep.
that reinforcement aspect is what gets him, brings him in, right? And yeah, it
Of
does
course.
the anger thing kind of get in the way of that, but it happens. It
Yeah,
does
and
happen.
there's varying degrees of anger. There's like throw
Yeah.
things on the floor and break things and punch the wall anger, and then there's anger that's just like raising your voice. So that's another thing. But I would say the one other thing is just there's an interesting social data from Brad Wilcox on authoritative parents versus authoritarian parents
Mm.
versus permissive parents. So one more thing I'll say on that is about what would I potentially change is I think sometimes my dad would err on the side of authoritarian and instead of authoritative. And again, I think this is connected to the mental health issues. You don't want to be permissive. You don't want to be like, oh, we're just friends, anything goes. You don't want to be authoritarian, my way or the highway, get in line. I'm the drill sergeant. You do everything that I say. And yes, because you're the child and I'm God to you. I'm the God figure. I'm the parent, right?
Mhm.
That too much of that can be harmful. Too much of the permissive can be harmful. The authoritative way is I am the authority. I'm here, as the God-given authority, and I love you. And this is largely why we do things in an age-appropriate way. And I'm going to help be your coach to make sure you do this because I want to grow you into a saint, right? And so it's more of an accompaniment. You're still the coach, you're the dad, you're the mother, you are the boss, right? But there is much more of I'm a coach, I'm a guide approach, as opposed to I am the dictator, or I am you are my servant. So that's another thing. And again, I'm not saying my dad never did the authoritative, he just did the authoritarian, but there was a level of element growing up at times where my dad, would be very he could err towards that side. And again, you could say, well, what's worse, being permissive or being authoritarian? I don't know, maybe being permissive would be worse. It's hard to say, right? But I think aiming towards authoritative is best.
Yeah. Well, dads need to be a leader, and sometimes that
Yes.
can come across as authoritative for sure, but also you tend to lean towards that authoritarian aspect as opposed to that. But if it's done with the idea that it's love is the ambition or pursuit, I should say, then usually you're a little more forgiving. You're a little more forgiving.
Yeah.
Not
definitely.
to say it's perfect, but all right, good, great question, great question, great answer. So we had questions about the book list. So there's a lot of links in there, so you guys take a look at that. Also, so here's a question came in from Chelsea. So how do you navigate or plan to navigate homeschooling as a working mom, assuming you plan to homeschool? So
Yeah.
you got young kids, and yeah, you're right. I mean, I would argue, though, we get this question a lot where how do I homeschool my 5-year-old? Well, we say our response is, hey, go outside and play with them, read to them, take them to the grocery store. If you want to really get into math, you can teach them how to add those kinds of things. That's what homeschooling is at such a young age. But so what do you think? How do you navigate that as a working mom?
Well, what we're going to start with, we're doing, homeschool-ish things. He's 5, so we haven't done any formal school beyond kind of some workbooks, and we read a lot together as a family. And I think as a working mom too, the person that's with my children, so we definitely don't do daycare or anything. Thankfully, we don't have to do that. If we had to do that, then I would, further try to adjust my work schedule so that we wouldn't have to do that. But we do, we're very careful about who's with the kids if I'm not with them or my husband's not with them. Obviously, it's ideal if that's going to be family, but otherwise, you want to select someone who can be a kind of motherly or grandmotherly figure. In our case, it's kind of someone who's a grandmotherly figure for our kids that we can build a deep relationship with, who's very aligned with us in, how we do our family culture. And so we've been blessed to be, have that person. And that's the reason I'm able to feel confident when I leave my kids with her. How am I going to do school? We're going to do part-time kindergarten in the fall at a classical Catholic academy. And, the days that he's not doing that classroom experience with other children, including family members of mine, which we're very blessed with that we have family that goes to the school. I will, in the mornings or maybe in the afternoons, do maybe a little bit of formal type educations with him, depending on his kind of aptitude for it at the time. He's a 5-year-old boy, so I don't want to overdo anything. And then we just do other activities like, we try to do piano lesson. Actually, he's a little young for that too, but we have a neighbor who teaches piano, so we walk over to her house. So we're kind of making it work. What's it going to look like in 5 years when all of them are school age? Maybe we have even more, Lord willing. I think we might do a full-time classical academy. I'm not sure yet that we're going to do homeschool. If we do homeschool, I will do a part-time academy, classical academy option, where there's another great school in Orange County called St. Joseph of Cupertino that we've looked at. We love them. So we're going to kind of figure it out, to be honest, year by year. And I'll basically accommodate, I'm very blessed. I have a unique situation where I really set my own schedule. Not everyone has that blessing when they're a working mom, but I can set my own schedule. So I'll kind of, depending on the needs of my kids, and if I'm going to do the homeschool model, part-time school, or I'm going to end up doing the full-time academy, based on what they need, I'll work my work schedule around what they need, because they are my first, priority. So we're figuring it out. I'll be back in 5 years and let you know where we landed. But I do think there's some great classical there are some great schools, that are full-time schools for kids. And there are part-time academies that serve, co-ops that serve homeschool families. So I don't think that God can't work, great good for the family through these different models. I think homeschooling is very special, though, especially for younger children. And we should celebrate it. And I'm very grateful for, obviously, my homeschool experience.
Great. And we have just a couple more minutes here left, but
Yeah.
let's look at, all right. So during homeschooling as a child, did your mom have set days for the older kids and others for the young, or how is it best to
Yeah.
homeschool various age groups? So I guess from your point of view, how did that play out at the house?
So I think my mom was highly active and highly social, and my dad was very intellectual, and they ended up starting a classical Christian academy where other parents and then ultimately hired teachers would teach different ages, different subjects. So that was their real, the cheat code, right? That's how I think they were able to really pull it off, and they were able to do it in a very, I think, phenomenal way. I think we were really well educated overall as kids. Maybe aspects of science. My mother still is like, "Did you take geometry?" I'm like, "Yeah, I did." I don't remember; it wasn't pleasant, but so there's some like, did we really do all the things? But we got into good schools. We did, most of us kids, not all, went to college. We scored well on the different tests, and again, different kids have different talents. Right? Your kid might not be as sort of academically gifted in this certain realm, but maybe they have other gifts, right, that you want to foster. So I'm not saying you have to score well in tests to be a good student or to be a good, educated person. But yeah, I mean, I think I don't know where I was going with that. I'm sorry. I just what was the original question that you were asking?
The question was multiple.
Multiple age groups,
kids,
of course. Yeah. See, I'm so not there yet. So I'm not like in that zone. But yeah, they had help. They built systems of help. And it was very hard because they founded that homeschool network. They were the pioneer family. My mother, she was a stay-at-home mom, but she worked in some ways as much as I'm working now as a working mom, because she was building a school, and she was building a community, and she was building activities. She founded the Homeschool Debate Club. She founded the academy with my dad and a couple other families. So, and it's a academy that's still running. So they worked really hard, and they built things to serve their kids and to serve other families. It's not, there's no easy way to do it, I guess is what I'm trying to say, from what I can see. But I highly recommended doing it with other families, because, not one person can handle it all. We're not meant to do it alone. You as a homeschool parent are not meant to like have it all figured out, be able to teach every topic in every way at every age. I don't think that is, personally, maybe people disagree, I don't think that's realistic. We're made to need each other, including in the homeschool community.
Well, and I'll just plug homeschoolconnections.com, frankly.
There you go. Perfect.
I mean, that's what we do. We offer the a
Yep.
la carte courses for those parents who can't find the resource to teach them. So,
Yep.
but there are a lot of other good ones out there for sure. And they've been sponsors of this conference. But I agree with
Awesome.
you. I
Yeah.
think that it's really challenging for moms to bear that burden. I mean, they're already bearing the burden of trying to do what they need to do to keep the household functioning.
Yes.
And then on top of that, schooling the kids.
Yeah.
And by the way, for those dads who are listening, you should be involved too as best as you can. I mean,
Oh yeah. And just to be clear, my dad, he taught us classes. He worked full time, but we would wake up early, as we got older. He would teach us Greek in the mornings. He did the Western civilization class. So we would do all the church fathers and doctors, the philosophers, a lot of the great literature, not all, but we had also English class and other classes. But he did that with us for 4 years in high school, once a week, or maybe even twice a week, actually. We would do that class with my dad.
That's cool.
So he did math. He would often we did Saxon math books, and my mother would try to do it, but that wasn't her thing. And so, now he was a computer programmer, and he would often work from home. So, and he was a night owl. He'd work crazy hours. So he'd sometimes pop in at 3 p.m. and do a math class, so it was a bit chaotic, but they were both all in. And, I know some homeschool families, maybe that's more difficult, but I do think they both really tried to put in 100%.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I think that brings us to a close, but this has been great, Lila. I mean,
Thank you.
Your insights, your perspective from your own personal experiences and helping families inspire a culture of life at home. I think will be very, very helpful as the folks that are watching this live, but also watching it or recording. They'll thrive, because of those things. And let's have you back in about 5 years, right? So
We'll
when
see.
when you've made that decision or whatever that decision is made, and we'll have you back in a few years from now to see how things are coming along. How's that sound?
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. God bless
All right.
everybody. Keep up the
Thanks,
beautiful
Lila.
work.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Have a
you.
great one. God bless.
God bless.